Welcome to 1202, the Human Factors Podcast. The podcast that covers all things about humans, technology, and particularly the bit in between.
And welcome to this episode of 1202, the Human Factors Podcast. Today, we're back into the realm of cybersecurity, but more this time, I think, we're going from the research and applied research perspective to try and get that different flavor or different viewpoints about how all this comes together. Today's guest is someone I'm pretty sure is invested in some sort of time travel or time turner device for those of you who are Harry Potter fans out there. The number of roles he has and the number of influence the amount of influence he has and the amount of work he does, he's quite frankly staggering, and yet he's still one of the nicest guys I know. So it gives me great pleasure to invite somebody I've tried to get on this podcast for a long time. They've always promised that they were going to do it, and for a good couple of years now. But then he had the audacity to go out to Australia and get interviewed by Sharon Todd, the president HFESA out there, who I previously interviewed here, and he interviewed her. She interviewed him. The drop of a hat. So I've demanded that we have equality over here. So it gives me a great pleasure to welcome Professor Phil Morgan. Phil, welcome and thank you for joining us.
It's an absolute pleasure, Barry. And yes, I did do a podcast with Sharon in Australia. So had you invited me to Australia, I might have done one a bit earlier. But
so that's what I'm going to do to encourage more people to do things. Is the far-flung foreign shores to make it more appealing. I don't know what the problem is with South Wales when it's raining. I can't see why that's an issue. Phil, thank you for joining us. For those of the people who are maybe not aware of what you're doing at the moment, what is your current role, and what does that look like on a day-to-day basis?
That's often one of the most complicated questions for me to answer because I have multiple roles, as you mentioned during the very, very kind introduction. So I'm a professor of human factors and cognitive science within the School of Psychology at Cardiff University in Wales, in the UK. So that's my title, and that's my day-to-day job. As part of that, I lead a fairly large human factors excellence research group within psychology and at Cardiff University, where we specialise in all sorts of areas such as transportation, human factors, AI and automation, assistive robotics, and so on, and cybersecurity. I'm also director of research for what is known as the Cardiff University Centre for Artificial Intelligence, Robotics and Human Machine Systems, abbreviated to IROMS. There's about 100 of us involved in that at the university and about 60 external organisations. As well as that, I'm the Human Factors and Transportation Lead for what is known as the Digital Transformation Innovation Institute at Cardiff University. And I also spend a lot of time working for the large multinational aerospace company Airbus, where I was seconded from 2019 to 2022 for a mere 4 days of my working week, which meant that I only had to work another 5 days in my day job to set up a human-centric cybersecurity and human factors team, which currently exists, with a number of people working there. And you interviewed one of those in a previous podcast, Dr. Laura Bishop, who was one of my PhD students. So I'm going to end on this one by saying I also supervise lots of PhD students, and that's one of my favourite parts of my job.
And believe it or not, he sleeps and stuff as well. I've heard a vicious rumor that occasionally you close your eyes.
Occasionally.
How did this journey start for you? Because I know we've sort of talked about this before, but what was that? When did you first hear about human factors? What gave you that first jump into the field?
Again, a really, really nice question. So my route into psychology was perhaps not an unusual one, but it was largely unexpected. I was going to go to university and be either an architect, a graphic designer, or work in animation. Little did I know that I was going to sign up to a psychology degree 10 minutes before the UCAS deadline, and then start a psychology degree some 6 months later without actually knowing how to spell psychology. I'd read a Sigmund Freud book during the summertime, doing a part-time job, and thought, well, I know everything. This is all about analysing dreams, right? I didn't really hear much about human factors until I got to the final year of the degree course, which was in the School of Psychology at Cardiff University. I have gone to some other places, but I'll come back because it's brilliant. And I was taught by a couple of very, very inspirational individuals. So one was Dr. Simon Banbury, who was working at Cardiff University at the time. He now leads a very successful consultancy in Canada. and he taught us about aviation, human factors, and the kind of errors and mistakes that pilots were making, previously. And he was talking about new systems that were being implemented into aircraft and so on. I thought, wow, this is, I never realized that this could be part of psychology. This is fascinating. But if I'm completely honest, the most inspirational person became my PhD supervisor, lifelong friend and mentor, Professor Dylan Jones, who to me is one of the forefront fathers of human factors, applied cognitive psychology, and everything else to do with that. Dylan worked in so many different areas: defense human factors, transportation human factors. He was working on virtual reality in the 1980s. It was just mind blowing. He sadly passed away a couple of years ago. So yeah, he was my utter inspiration, and I was hooked. He asked me. He actually said, "You look like the kind of chap who would want to do a PhD," and I didn't hesitate. I said, "Absolutely." If I'm completely honest, I did not know what a PhD was when he said that, but I accepted it anyway.
Brilliant. So that's where you started, and like I said, along the way you've picked up a number of roles and things like that. What's been that career path? What's been the stepping stones that's got you to where you are today?
Again, another interesting question. Things didn't go as planned, but they worked out really well in the end. So I settled on a PhD looking at human error in relation to task interruption in goal-directed memory. As part of the PhD, I was meant to sort of promised that I would be running experiments with pilots and looking at mistakes during takeoff and landing. I cut that very long story short. I never got to my pilots. I did a lot of experimental work in the lab. And throughout the PhD, I thought, you know what? I don't think academia is for me. I'd like to go into industrial type research or maybe government research. So my first actual job interviews at the end of my PhD were for organizations such as DSTL and Kinetic and various other places. But then for some reason, my heart was being pulled back to academia. And I thought, you know what? If I could forge a career in academia, which I absolutely loved, and I love even more today, but along the way, continually work with industry partners, with government, with third sector and so on, isn't that the best of both worlds? So I started out then in a postdoc career, and my first 5 years of postdoc involved me working on human factors projects, looking in the defense sector, looking at the design of data fused interfaces, new human machine interfaces, and various other things. And much as I predicted, I started to work with lots of external organizations, and I've done that ever since. So even though I'm situated in a brilliant university, in one of the best psychology departments in the world, I get the best of both worlds because I get to work with multiple external partners, including yourself, Acacia, on a number of projects. Yeah, it's brilliant. I couldn't ask for more.
No, it is. It certainly sounds like you've had a good. You said the plan didn't go as expected, but you've had an overall view about what it is that you wanted to achieve, and you're largely, I guess it's almost a cliched phrase, but you're living the dream to a certain extent.
Yeah, living a very busy dream, I would say, but it is a dream. I never thought I'd be doing what I do now. If somebody said to me, 25 years ago, you're going to be working, I'm a techno skeptic at the end of the day. And if somebody said to me, you're going to be working in areas such as artificial intelligence, automation, cybersecurity, human robot interaction, I would have laughed them out of the room. Yeah. I would have said, absolutely no chance. If somebody said to me, you're going to be a psychologist, I would have laughed them out of the room. If somebody said you were going to be an academic, same thing. But it's a very, very great position to be in. I wake up every morning and there's often new challenges. We as folks, I guess, working in human factors, we don't know what challenges there are going to be in 5 to 10 years time. There could be something completely different that doesn't even really exist yet, and we'll be working on that. I mean, who could ask for more?
And there must be something about the university structure here that allows you to almost come up with the wacky ideas, that I love to work in blue sky research, but almost you're one step higher than that, where you can sort of turn around and say, I've kind of got an inkling of an idea. Can I run with it? Do you have
Yes.
that sort of freedom, or is that changing? Or
I think, to be honest, it was one of the reasons I was drawn to academia as a career, and why I didn't accept the positions that I was very, very kindly offered by some of the organizations that I interviewed for. It's because of that, you go into academia, not everybody follows what they did during their PhD. I followed that to a certain extent, but you could, with the right focus, with the right research grants coming in, with the right team, with the right PhD students and so on, you could focus on a topic, a challenge, for example, for the rest of your career, for 35, 40 years plus. Or you can branch out a bit. And that's what I tended to do. My focus was on applied cognitive science. I then realized that human factors was a bigger, wider area that I was interested in, because I'm far more interested, I guess, in the applied nature of the work and the impact that it can have on people, companies, governments, industry, and so on, than sometimes, the extent of the theoretical side of things. But I'm also a theorist at heart. So you get to combine theory with applied research in academia. And as I said, with the right funding, with the right support, and working in a brilliant place like Cardiff University and within the School of Psychology at Cardiff, you could spend 5-10 years researching a particular problem. And I think there are very few other sectors where you get that kind of freedom to do that. And you can become, I'm not saying that I'm this, but you can become, the world leading expert on a particular topic or topics, knowing everything inside out.
Yeah, I think, and that's something that has got to be quite attractive from that academic perspective, just to be able to have that ability to properly drill down into stuff. I guess from an industry perspective, we become experts in what we do, but then you have to quickly move on. And it's very, I've been doing stuff the past couple of weeks where you go back and look at stuff and realize that things have moved on, because you can't stay drilled into that sort of focus and follow it tightly. So I can see the appeal of that. Right, we're going to take a quick break, and then we're going to drill into this whole the whole cyber piece. And so we're going to be back right after this short break.
You are listening to 1202, the Human Factors Podcast. We wanted to take the opportunity to say thank you for your support. You can help further by rating us through your podcast provider, sharing us through social media, and telling your friends and colleagues. Let's work together in raising awareness of the value in putting users at the center of what we do.
And welcome back. And today we're chatting here with Phil Morgan. So, Phil, around the whole piece of cybersecurity, and you've already alluded to some of the interviews we've done already. What is the role here in human factors in enhancing cybersecurity measures?
So I asked myself that question about 10 years ago when I got into research that was looking at cybersecurity aspects of connected and autonomous vehicles. So I was doing a lot of work, which I've done for the last sort of 10 to 15 years, on the design, development, and deployment, and particularly a user-centered, focused approach to driverless cars, which we know, there's literature, there's news stories on this absolutely everywhere. For those folks out there who are perhaps non-believers, they're not just come in, they've arrived. They are in certain countries, so they've arrived. And we started looking at the cybersecurity aspects of these pieces of technology, because when you think about it, you've got a connected vehicle that is driving itself, and you're in it as a passenger. And very much like any kind of computer system that's connected to the internet, there will be vulnerabilities within that system. And then I started to imagine a situation. It was almost like a sort of doomsday scenario of what if somebody inadvertently, accidentally, or there was a malicious actor there, got into the system of that vehicle, manipulated something, and even just caused it to stop immediately, or to go through a red light, or to do something else. And I thought, you know what, this is a massive problem, and this was probably back in 2015. This is a massive problem, and it's coming to us very, very soon. So then I started thinking about cybersecurity in relation to psychology and human factors, and quickly realized, and I said this to a few people, I think back in 2018-19, cybersecurity was a relatively new thing.
Yeah.
But the ways in which we approach human vulnerabilities to cybersecurity are by drawing upon human factors methods principles, psychology's methods principles, like we've done in loads of other sectors for the past 130 years. So, for example, looking at the challenges of aviation and automation in the cockpit, where human factors research really shaped safety in the cockpit to make flying one of the safest ways of traveling in the world. Why is that any different to try and to understand human cybersecurity strengths and vulnerabilities and how we can better perform when using computer systems anywhere? So I started to kind of think about this, and I was looking at areas such as attention, perception, memory, decision making, rational thinking, irrational thinking, emotion, all of these cognitive psychology areas that I've studied for years and years and years, and thought each one of these has a role in cybersecurity, as do lots of the different human factors, methods, and approaches, such as cognitive workload. The busier we are, the more time pressured we are, the more susceptible we are to engage in a cyber risky activity. Situation awareness. The lower our situation awareness is, the more susceptible we are to engage in a cyber risky activity. And I could go on for hours in relation to this. So I guess what I'm trying to say there is, I was as a summary, I was able to fairly quickly realize that we can draw upon almost every aspect of human factors and applied psychology to address this massive challenge that we have of humans reportedly being the weakest link in the cybersecurity chain. And that's driven me ever since.
It is true. It is a weird thing, isn't it? Certainly, I think it's a weird thing, more looking from the outside to a certain extent, that we always seem to be late to the table in realizing that we develop technology, and then suddenly we realize that people are part of it. You mentioned autonomous vehicles. There's autonomous vehicles out there, but there's still users operating them. They're just very remote from it, or there might be, the way they've coded them, or whatever it is. And cybersecurity is kind of the same, because the malicious actors are still people. They're just using cyber to adhere that. Yet we seem to have, for the amount of time that cyber's been around, we only, in the past sort of 10 years ago, we seem to be bringing this forward. Why do you think that is? I mean, it's $1 million question, I know. We'd solve all HR problems with a single swipe. But do you think there's any real drive about why we are so late to the table with this type of thing?
I guess it goes back to some of the fundamentals of human factors. And, even this morning I was writing or updating a lecture that I'm delivering to some of our third-year human factors psychology students next week, where, exactly what you were saying at the start of that question. We all too often come in with human factors potential solutions to a problem after the technology has been developed and deployed. And I can't remember who quoted this, but there's something out there that says it costs 100 times more to take that approach rather than to build good human factors, good user-centered design, good human-computer interaction into systems beforehand. I think part of the problem is, I use the word problem, maybe that's not the right word, but I'll use it for now, is that we have some brilliant technologists out there. Well, we have lots of brilliant technologists who are working on automation, artificial intelligence, absolutely galloping developments in these areas. As we know, AI is everywhere. It has been for some years, but at the moment it is absolutely everywhere. And the technology gets developed perhaps far too quickly because we can do it. And then the kind of human side of it, the user-centered side, becomes a sort of secondary issue. Yeah. So, I was once, more than once, this happened sort of in the early days of my PhD career, where I was chatting to some really, really great engineering and computer science colleagues at the time. And, the common sort of saying was, we can develop the technology so quickly, isn't it your job as a psychologist to train the humans to keep up?
Yeah.
And we had lots of really interesting conversations about that, to say, we've been evolving for a very, very long time. It takes a very long time for things to change. Even for us to break a simple habit, can take 6 months to a year. So it all comes back to, I think more and more people are realizing and appreciating this now, that we really need to have a multidisciplinary approach to all of these different areas, to be developing things with human factors experts, with multidisciplinary other experts at the design prototyping phase, right the way through to the deployment. Then we will find that there are far fewer issues with these technologies in the future.
No, I think that's, that we could probably go on for another hour or so talking about the systems approach or systems thinking and things like that. But to bring us back to, I guess, before I took us off on a tangent around security, what are the most, to set a scene a bit, what are the most common human errors that lead to cybersecurity breaches?
Unfortunately, there are so many of them. There are so many. So I try not to say humans are the weakest link in cybersecurity, but we are the weakest link in cybersecurity. But what I do try and say on top of that is we do not have to be. So just thinking about, for example, cognitive biases. We're all subject to cognitive biases. It's one of the reasons why we get on with our day-to-day lives and don't cognitively overload ourselves with so much information, having to think deeply about every decision we ever make. So, for example, we use a lot of shortcuts. We rely on past experience. We look at confirmatory information. If we're very invested in something, we suffer what's known as the sunk cost effect, where it's easier to carry on with it, even though it's going to potentially fail, than it is to go back and start again. And this then applies to taking the example of phishing emails, for example. I'm sure everybody listening to this podcast will know what phishing is and may have been subjected to it. And people ask time and time again, why do people seem to fall victim to phishing emails? Isn't it really obvious, that we shouldn't be doing this? But we are succumbing to our cognitive vulnerabilities. We're succumbing to automatic processing styles that allow us to do things relatively quickly and get on with our busy day-to-day lives, working lives, as well as outside of work, so that we can almost bypass some of these things that we experience on a day-to-day basis. And the same goes for, it's not just dealing with phishing emails, it's those occurrences. There will be so many people out there who will know that plugging in, for example, a USB stick that's not theirs to their laptop because it's got a file on it that's really, really important to them at that point is probably not the best thing to do. But you've got 10 minutes before a really, really important deadline. You're going to submit something that you've been working on for 3 or 4 months. And if you don't submit it within 10 minutes, all of that work was for nothing. A lot of people will plug in that USB stick, knowing that it could cause catastrophic effects for them, for the business they work for, and so on. But we still do it. And it's not just those people who are necessarily not in the know when it comes to cybersecurity. I've got multiple examples. I'm not going to mention names or roles or those kind of things today, of people who are so clued up in the world of cybersecurity in terms of their job roles, but they've done it themselves. So none of us can get away from this. So we need to find solutions to support us to not succumb to those kind of things and to become less vulnerable.
And I guess it's easy to think about it as being, I mean, the phishing email is a good example of, succumb to a phishing attack. But it's not a static field. It feels like it's moving all the time. So I guess when I mentioned earlier about people, it is bad faith actors on the other side of things. They're changing the landscape all the time as we get used to, oh, that's clearly a phishing email, or that's clearly whatever it is. The next one that comes in seems to be smarter. And are you finding that how do you keep with that pace of change?
We are finding that, and it's incredibly difficult. So for example, in the past, we were all subject to what we abbreviate as SPAG, spelling, punctuation, and grammar, within email. So we'd look at an email, it could be from some crown prince of some particular country offering you billions of pounds. That's probably fake. Some people have clicked on those. But when you've got emails full of spelling, punctuation, and grammar issues that are apparently from, the chief executive officer from your company, you can probably spot that there's something going wrong there. One of the issues that we do have, as you said, there's a human behind every cyber attack for now, because AI is developing at a rapid pace, as we know. But what we're tending to find is, and this is a proper catch-22 situation, is a lot of the research, the great research that's being done on cybersecurity, the human factor side of cybersecurity, the socio and the technical side of cybersecurity, it gets published in journal articles, in conference papers, in books. People talk about it during things like podcasts and various other things. And those humans who are behind those cyber attacks are thinking, cognitive biases. Let's look at cognitive biases. How can we exploit them? So every time we make we take one step forward, we could in some cases be taking 2 steps back, but we have to do what we're doing. Otherwise, we're not going to win the battle. But a message to all of the cyber criminals out there, if any of them are listening to this podcast, is we have got so many experts in the world who are working on this, who I am certain know a lot more than they do. So we will try and be 2 or 3 steps ahead, but we're always going to be chased. There's always going to be a race. There's always going to be somebody behind us trying to catch up and trying to learn from what we're discovering day in and day out and getting out there in terms of publications and systems and solutions.
I guess you bring up the phishing email from the Nigerian prince who just wants his stuff. I guess there's an element there that they only have to be successful once.
Yeah.
Yet they presumably, everybody's had that email or a variation of that email. And as you say, 1 or 2 people have clicked on it. And I guess it is an order of magnitude, isn't it? Because the outcomes are so different. We're trying to stop everything. And yet they only have to get a couple through to make it worthwhile, I guess.
That's the thing. And you've got, the example you gave there. Yeah, they get 1 person coming through. They could clear somebody's bank account. I guess what's worse than that, and taking the example of 1 person again, is imagine you're working for, a large worldwide organization, 100,000 employees, whatever it is. And then those cyber criminals get through to one of the employees. That could then proliferate through the system and take down the entire network systems within that company, shut down production lines, shut down all sorts of things. Could cost billions every single day just because 1 person clicked on that malicious link, or 1 person opened that attachment, or 1 person inadvertently plugged in a device that they shouldn't have plugged in. And that's, I think, for me, where one of the biggest worries comes from. This idea that when something gets into maybe 1 or possibly 2 or 3 people, it could have effects on thousands of people. And then we kind of scale that up to things like emergency services, critical national infrastructure. What happens if that kind of thing gets into our electricity supply, our water supply, our healthcare systems, and so on? It's a huge concern.
Yeah. I guess you sort of touched upon the way different people are. How do cultural differences, I guess, impact the effectiveness of, because we do cybersecurity awareness training. I've sat on numerous, I don't know how effective they truly are. So, online training around do click this, don't click that. But they have been produced, I guess, for us in a Western culture.
Yes.
Does the different cultures around the world affect how you deal with cyber?
So we've been very, very lucky and blessed to be doing research with universities all around the world and companies all around the world, particularly over the last sort of 5 to 10 years. So, for example, we've done a fair bit of work over the last 3 years on sort of rule of law in the age of artificial intelligence. So, looking at the proliferation of artificial intelligence and to what extent are there similarities and differences between the ways in which we interact with these technologies in a Western country like the UK and, for example, an Eastern country like Japan, for example. Very, very different thinking and processing styles. So, for example, it is quite well documented that folks in Asia, in countries like like Japan and China and various other countries, think in a very holistic way. So they've got what the best way to describe it, I guess, is a symbiosis with lots of objects and things around them. So, for example, there may be a larger symbiosis between an individual living in Japan and a chair that they sit on to eat their dinner at or work on a laptop at than we have with a chair in the UK. What this kind of leads to or links to is this more holistic processing style, which I guess is, kind of taught at a very young age, and it becomes sort of ingrained in the way you live your life, means that folks in those countries tend to evaluate situations in a more holistic way than we tend to do in the West. We tend to be very, very piecemeal. We look for bits of information to try and understand a situation. We'll then, sort of increase the probability of whether we think we're right or not. And then when we land on something, we might make a decision and press a button because we think that we've got enough information now to make that decision. We've got some evidence through the fascinating research we've been doing with collaborators in Asian countries that there is a more holistic, complete thinking style there, where maybe under some circumstances, to a less extent, some information that we might miss might not be missed. But that doesn't mean to say that in some countries and cultures that people are far less vulnerable to things like cyber attacks than they are in other cultures. It's just different thinking and processing styles. But going back to your point, Barry, about cyber awareness and training there, what we really need to do is learn from each other. And these collaborative research projects around the world, I think, are amongst the best ways to better understand what are our strengths, what are our cybersecurity strengths across countries and cultures, and how can we harness these and pull them together so as a collective whole across the world, we can become more resilient to these kind of things. So yeah, absolutely fascinating stuff.
So and this is, I guess this leads into this academia thing, because I'm really interested in this idea that you sort of, I guess I largely see cyber as an industry problem. It's my computer systems that they're going after, and therefore my IP they're stealing, or my finances they're digging into, and et cetera, et cetera. What is the role of academia in this field? Why is it not just an industry challenge?
It's a very, very good question. I'd start by saying that I think the best way to address all of these problems, and it's the way I've been looking at it throughout my career, not just within cyber, within everything I've done, is to have collaboration between industry and academia. I think one of the things that academia brings to the table, and this is certainly not pointing fingers at anybody in industry, is that, going back to a point I made earlier in the podcast, within academia, you have a number of people who have spent 5, 10, 15, 20, 30, 40 years becoming experts in maybe 1, 2, 3, or 20 different things that they've been researching for a very, very long time. So, for example, I'm privileged to work with, I could talk about some of my own areas, but people can look at my profile and sort of see what I do. But I work with people who are world-leading experts in psycholinguistics, so the psychology of language. What they don't know about language, it's just unbelievable. And then we think about things like, how do we communicate cybersecurity information? How do we understand what's written in these phishing emails and various other things? And how is that processed in the human mind? I personally would go to somebody who spent 25, 30 years working in the area of psycholinguistics. They may have come up with a theory. They may have come up with a conceptual framework. They may have written 200 or 300 papers on how we process language down to the neuroscience level. And various other things, to ask them for their views and their advice on why are we falling victim to these kind of things because of the way things are written within an email, for example. So yeah, I think academia brings a lot of very, very focused and sort of, in some ways, wide-ranging expertise to the table. And I'm certainly finding, I've been in academia for coming up to 25 years. Academia is far less theoretically simple science focused as it was. And when I say simple science, I mean like basic experimentation. I don't mean simple and basic in the sense that it's easy, but manipulate one thing, look at an outcome. But yeah, within academia, I think folks over the last 25 years, maybe through the proliferation of technology and the way things are going, have become far more applied. So it's a best of both worlds thing. I think academia teamed up with industry, teamed up with government and others, that's the best way to tackle these kind of problems.
That's really cool. I mean, obviously, as you mentioned earlier, we've got the great privilege of working with you and your members of your team at the moment. And we have done with different universities throughout our time. And it certainly seems to be that there is a step change there to enable I guess it's, we like the word exploitation, don't we? About being able to take the research that you're doing and exploit it almost as quickly as possible.
Yes.
To see the nauseating phrase "flash to bang," of getting stuff out there, and I presume that's now that Pandora's box has been opened. We're never going to go back to, I guess, that the I don't know, sandal wearing academic who just sits at a desk with piles of paper and you never see them for the light of day. I guess, is that model now completely shot?
Before I answer that, I have to take my sandals off. But so yeah, that box has certainly been opened, and I think I speak for a number of people in relation to this. I do hope that never changes. People. I'm not just saying in academia. This is other areas as well. People can find themselves working in silos, chipping away at the same thing for time and time, and that's absolutely fine. That's great. But one of the reasons why we do research, and noting, within the UK and numerous other countries, in academia is largely funded by public money. It shouldn't just be about advancing theory, understanding things at a large scale conceptual level. That's really, really important. But what we're really trying to do is offer individual right the way through to societal changes for the greater good of people. So to me, the research that we do in academia, we have a duty to deliver impact to the real world. So yeah, I think the impact or the so what of what we're doing, I find it very, very tricky sometimes, and there will be people listening to this podcast who will have heated discussions in the future. If somebody can't tell me the so what of the research grant that they're applying for, I get really, really worried. Why are you proposing to do this research over the next 3 years? What's the so what? And if somebody says to me, well, it's going to advance knowledge, I get a little concerned about that. So yeah, this idea that we focus on outputs, impact, work with industry, work with other partners, that is one really, really, really nice way of ensuring that the work you're doing won't just end up in a, this is bread and butter for me and other academic colleagues, but it won't just end up in an academic journal, a conference paper, or a book. It will be having an effect on at least one person, but possibly many thousands or many hundreds of thousands of people for some time ahead. And that's what drives so many people, I think.
Cool. I guess just to wrap up this in a sort of pithy sort of way, I'm going to ask possibly the hardest question. What does the future of this human-centered cybersecurity look like? What do you think is the big thing out there? What's the next challenge on the horizon, do you think?
That is a big question. It's one that I ask myself probably every single day. I think we need to start moving away from an idea. There's been a lot written on this already, but we need to start moving away from the idea that just being aware of what our cybersecurity vulnerabilities are, being educated, through a one-day course or whatever it is, that's probably not going to be the best solution on its own. There is so much evidence out there to show that training and awareness campaigns, they're not particularly always that effective, depending on the context and the domain. Let's start harnessing the technology that's being developed to better enhance our strengths against cybersecurity. So, for example, I'll give one example: augmented reality.
Mm-hmm.
In my view, there's nothing better, and I've got research evidence to support this across multiple domains. There's nothing better than being immersed within a situation so that you're experiencing it firsthand, possibly in virtual space, but it's still firsthand, to be able to see, to be able to visualize, to be able to manipulate, even if that's in a virtual space, those things that you're being taught about, and it could be, don't pick up this particular device, there's a rogue actor in the room, can you spot the rogue actor? In very much the same way as the driving hazard perception test was developed for, drivers in lots and lots of countries before they could get a driving license. You need to be able to spot what the hazards are before you can pass that part of the test, and then eventually pass your full test so that you can spot the car come up the junction, those kind of things. So I think, yes, training, awareness, they can be great. We need objective measures to be able to measure people's interactions with these technologies, but let's use this technology. A VR headset these days costs what, 150, 200 UK pounds. Let's use this technology and use augmentation so that people can experience it firsthand. And then go into the roots of cognitive psychology, which was where I started my sort of psychology career as a doctor back in 2001. That's where the deeper and meaningful cognitive processing will occur. And that's where we will get even those kind of lifelong changes to the brain and the way in which we think about things, because we'll remember it. We'll talk about it to other people. It might be to our colleagues, to our families, to our children, and so on, versus just a PowerPoint slide that we may have seen 2 weeks ago that we've probably forgotten 2 weeks later.
Yeah. No, I completely get that. I do have a real issue with online learning in its current format. It feels like it's a box ticking exercise rather than actually something that's been thought out to last more than, like you say, that 2 weeks.
Absolutely.
So we're going to take another quick break, and then we'll come back to you with the final 3 questions.
Before Barry gets to the final 3, my name's Nick Rome. Let me tell you about this. Technology in our world is evolving at a phenomenal pace, and keeping up with what that means in the human factors world can be challenging. That's where Human Factors Cast comes in. Human Factors Cast is a weekly podcast that highlights and breaks down stories that are chosen by you, the human factors community.
New York State is giving out hundreds of robots as companions for the elderly.
Buttons in cars are safer and quicker to use than touchscreen.
A prototype just achieved a major milestone that actually fits the description of a flying car.
The show provides perspective based on experiences from different domains and different industries. We even cover some of the hottest conferences in the field. On this episode, we're recapping EHF, Ergonomics and Human Factors Conference, Neuroergonomics Conference, Human Factors and Ergonomics Society, UXPA International. Join me, Nick Rome.
And me, Barry Kirby.
Every Friday morning when Human Factors Cast drops on YouTube and your favorite podcast directory. And remember,
It depends.
And now I'm going to send it back over to Barry for the final three.
Great, and welcome back. And I'm here with Phil Morgan. So for the final three questions, we asked these of everybody. So I guess let's jump straight in. Do you have a go-to book or paper that you use repeatedly? It can be technical or it could be fiction, whichever works for you.
Oh, anything I've ever published, I read them every day. No, I'm only joking. It's a really, really difficult question because one thing my family and friends sort of tell me off for this is that I tend these days not to read for pleasure. I find it very difficult because I feel that everything I read, I have to learn.
Right.
So trying to read a fictional book without sitting there for, hundreds of hours is quite tricky. Can I give two examples? Would that be okay? So the first example, I think that's essential for every single human factors practitioner is the Human Factors Methods textbook by Neville Stanton, Paul Salmon, and other colleagues. I mean, it's the Bible for human factors experts. Even though folks like yourself, Barry, myself, and others, we probably know every word within that textbook. Sometimes we sit back and we think, I need to perform a hierarchical task analysis. I'm going to go to the book just to make sure I'm doing that in the right way. But there is a book that is partly academic, but partly sort of like a life story that I found really, really inspirational back in 2013. And the book is called The Emotional Life of Your Brain, and how to change the way you think, feel, and live. And this is by an academic in the US called Professor Richard Davidson. And the reason I found that book absolutely fascinating is it's not necessarily an autobiography of Richard's life. It tells the story about how he moved through academia and how he got into the areas that he was researching. He's essentially a world-leading expert on emotion and cognition. Mm-hmm. What it opened my eyes to was this idea that even though we have neuronal connections in the brain, and we have things then that form from those like attitudes, social norms, beliefs, and these kind of things, that they can change over time. And what Richard Davidson has shown through many hundreds, possibly up to 1,000 journal articles by now, is that we can use things like meditation, mindfulness, and various other things to actually affect permanent changes within our brain. Now, one of the reasons I was inspired by that is not because I'm a practicing meditator, not because I practice mindfulness. I don't. I probably should, but I don't. But it's this idea that we can change with the right amount of experience of doing something over and over again. We can change even the root of elements of our personality. And that then links to things that I've been talking about in other parts of the podcast of when people say, well, I can't change my habits, so therefore I'm always going to be cybersecurity vulnerable. You don't have to be. You don't have to be. So I'd recommend that book to anybody, but it also tells the story as well, and I'll end on this note with this one, of how in his early career, even though he studied at Harvard and some of the best universities in the world, there were very few of the top universities that would give Richard a chance, because they thought emotion and cognition, who cares? Fast forward 20, 30 years, I think any university in the world would have employed him time and time again, and they did. He's an absolutely fascinating individual.
Brilliant. Yes, I haven't read that, so we'll have to put that on my my Christmas list. If you could, and pick any time in your previous life that you would like, what advice would you give to your younger self?
Oh wow, that's an incredibly difficult one. Dearie me. To be an architect and not a psychologist or human factors expert. No, again, it's like I always wanted to be an architect, so I don't regret it. I just wish I could have two lives and do both things. I think one of the things, and I'm kind of really thinking about this off the top of my head at the moment. So talking to my children who are 17 and 13, they often say to me, "What's the point of school?
Mm-hmm.
You know, what's the point of school? We're doing all these things in maths and chemistry and physics and biology that we're never ever going to use in our lives again. What's the point?" And folks of our age and lots of other people, you start to realize that take school really, really seriously. Take every opportunity you've got to learn really seriously, because it's amazing how many things that you learn about when you're, in primary school, secondary school, if you go to university, come back at some point in your life. And had you spent a bit more time focusing on that topic, you would handle what you're doing in your life at that point much better. So the advice I would have given myself was, don't feel that everything that I'm being taught is, well, not everything, but a lot of the things I'm being taught are boring or pointless. Embrace it. Embrace everything you can learn, because there's a chance that a lot of that will be used in your later life, in your career or everyday life.
Fantastic. What would you, so go fast forward a number of years, and I wish for me that this was a lot closer than it actually was, but that's different. When you come to retire, what would you like to be remembered for?
I should start that by saying academics never retire. Well, yeah, some do, but I think lots never really do. That's a really, really tricky question, because I work in so many different areas. Do you know what? What I'm going to say there is, I would like to be remembered as somebody who has, even in a small way, inspired a number of the future the number of people going into the future workforce, from degrees, from masters, PhDs. So, for example, I supervise lots and lots of PhD students. I've inspired them to think about a critical approach to applied psychology and human factors, and inspired them to think about technology development in the future through the lens of designing for failure, not designing for success. There are so many people out there who want to tick boxes by designing things that are going to be successful. Let's take a step back and think about what can go wrong. An example I'll give there is, just look at Formula One, the big world of Formula One. One of the reasons why that's so successful, why the machines are so successful, the cars, the drivers, is because they've applied design for failure. And it's no surprise that loads of other industries are learning from that, healthcare and various other things. So one thing that I try and impart onto my PhD students, as well as the typical things that come with a PhD, is, let's assume a hypothetical future where this thing you're focusing on could go wrong. How could it go wrong? What would we do about it? And how would we sort of black box think about putting that right? So yeah, I'd say it's the future generations coming through, rather than a career area or a particular paper or anything else.
Brilliant. And I'm sure I can almost guarantee that sort of legacy is almost guaranteed, just knowing many people who you've worked with.
That's
Phil,
very kind. Thank you, Barry.
Phil, thank you for taking this time to chat to us. It feels like we could have easily gone on for hours and hours on each individual bit that we've covered. So I appreciate we've kind of skated the surface of some of these, but hopefully it whets the interest for a lot of people. If people wanted to get in touch with you and chat about some of these things further, how would they go about doing that?
Yeah, that'd be really great. I welcome anybody getting in touch to talk about anything that we've discussed today, or my other areas. So if anybody does a search on me, so Phil Morgan, Cardiff University, I should hit top of the list, I think. So you can find my contact details there for the university. So Morgan Phil at cardiff.ac.uk. I'm also on Twitter at Phil Morgan PM. That's my initials, not Prime Minister. So Phil Morgan PM. I'm also on LinkedIn. I use LinkedIn quite a lot, so you can find my LinkedIn profile there. I use that far more than other sort of social media platforms. Yeah, so 3 different channels there. Get in touch, drop me an email, and if you'd like to start a conversation, let's do that.
Phil, that's brilliant. Thank you ever so much. Thank you again. And thank you all for listening and watching. Wherever you're consuming this content, do like, do comment, do share, if you've got the ability to review what we're doing, give us a 5-star written review, because that helps other people find what we do. And we all look forward to seeing you on the next episode.
Thank you for listening to 1202, the Human Factors Podcast. Please do get in touch with your thoughts, questions, and comments. You can contact us on social media such as Twitter, LinkedIn, and Facebook at 1202 Podcast. See you next time. And remember, it's more than just common sense.